God bless everyone. Today I will share the extraordinary testimony of Eliyahu David ben Shimon, a 74-year-old rabbi whose life took a profound turn after a near-death experience. A devout man who never believed Jesus was the Messiah, Eliyahu was unwavering in his faith, until a moment of unimaginable revelation shattered his world. He found himself in a place of darkness and despair, surrounded by haunting cries of torment, only to be confronted by a radiant figure whose presence and words would transform his understanding of faith forever. Now I'm going to read his letter exactly as he wrote it, and together we'll uncover Eliyahu's journey, his sin, and the path of Jesus that changed everything. I am Eliyahu David ben Shimon, a rabbi who has spent over 50 years devoted to serving God and my community. My lineage is one of Levites, a family steeped in sacred tradition, entrusted with serving in the temple since ancient times. From my earliest days, I felt the weight of this responsibility and the honor of continuing my family's legacy. Every moment of my life has been shaped by the teachings of the Torah and the pursuit of holiness. My faith was not just a belief, it was the very fabric of who I was, woven deeply into my identity and purpose. For decades, I immersed myself in the rich traditions of Judaism, passionately teaching and debating the scriptures. My conviction in the coming of the Messiah fueled my ministry, and I found great joy in guiding others on their spiritual journeys. Jerusalem, with its sacred history and profound connection to our faith, became my home, where I raised my son to embrace the same love for God and devotion to our people. I believed wholeheartedly that by adhering to the law and living a life of devotion, I was fulfilling the will of God. It was a life of purpose and dedication, and I took pride in my unwavering commitment to our faith. Yet, there was one belief I could never accept: the idea that Jesus of Nazareth could be the Messiah. To me, it was an impossible notion, a betrayal of everything I had been taught and everything I held sacred. I debated this point fiercely with thousands over the years, confident in my rejection. I was resolute, or so I thought. But life has a way of breaking even the strongest convictions. I could never have imagined that a single moment would challenge the foundation of my beliefs and thrust me into a reality I had spent a lifetime denying. What happened next would unravel everything I thought I knew and leave me face to face with a truth I could no longer ignore. It was December 25th, 2023, a day that began as ordinary as any other. I remember the chill in the air, the frost clinging to the windows as I prepared to make the short drive home. The roads were slick with ice, but I had driven this path countless times before and thought nothing of it. Little did I know that within moments, my life would take a turn so drastic, so unimaginable, that it would leave an indelible mark on my soul. As I rounded a bend, the car in front of me braked suddenly. I reacted instinctively, but the icy road betrayed me. My car spun out of control, colliding with another vehicle. The impact was deafening, a violent cacophony that ended in an eerie, suffocating silence. The crash left me disoriented, my body heavy, and my mind shrouded in confusion. Then, in what felt like an instant, everything around me faded to black. The world I knew disappeared, and I found myself descending into an abyss unlike anything I had ever imagined. The air grew thick and oppressive, as though it were alive and intent on suffocating me. I could hear faint cries, anguished wails that seemed to echo from the depths of eternity. Each sound pierced me, not just with their sorrow, but with an unbearable weight of despair. My surroundings were engulfed in a darkness so profound it felt tangible, wrapping itself around me like a suffocating shroud. I could feel myself falling deeper and deeper, yet there was no end in sight, only an endless void pulling me further into its depths. As I fell, the cries grew louder, more visceral, each one carrying the weight of unimaginable torment. The despair in those sounds was overwhelming, filling the void with a sorrow so raw it seeped into every fiber of my being. The oppressive atmosphere seemed to crush my spirit, leaving me paralyzed and helpless. This was no dream. It was something far more real, more terrifying than anything I had ever encountered in my years of studying sacred texts. I couldn't comprehend where I was or why I was there, but one thing became painfully clear. I had entered a place beyond the realm of life, a place where despair reigned supreme. And yet, in the midst of this harrowing descent, I began to see shadows and shapes materializing in the darkness, hinting at a revelation that would shatter everything I thought I knew. As I descended further into the oppressive abyss, the darkness began to shift, revealing a scene more horrifying than any nightmare I could have imagined. The walls surrounding me weren't made of stone or earth, but of living, writhing flesh. Faces were embedded in these grotesque walls, their expressions frozen in eternal agony. Their silent screams echoed through the cavern, reverberating in my soul. The walls pulsed as though alive, each movement amplifying the torment that filled the air. In the shadows, grotesque figures emerged, neither human nor beast, their distorted forms writhing in perpetual torment. The air itself was thick with despair, its weight suffocating, pressing down on me as if to crush every ounce of hope from my being. This was no abstract concept of hell. It was a visceral, horrifying reality. As I looked closer, a chilling recognition struck me. Among the anguished faces, I saw men I had once revered, rabbis and spiritual mentors who had guided me in my faith. These were men who had taught me the sacred texts, who had shaped my understanding of God and righteousness. And yet, here they were, chained in this pit of eternal suffering. My heart sank as their tortured expressions locked onto me, their eyes filled with despair and regret. Then one of them spoke, his voice rasping and heavy with sorrow. We were blind. We rejected the Messiah sent by God. Another voice joined, confessing, we clung to the law but refused the Redeemer he sent. Their words shattered the very foundation of my beliefs, leaving me reeling with a devastating realization. If these men whom I had always believed were righteous were here, then what was the truth about salvation? Just as despair threatened to consume me entirely, a piercing beam of light cut through the darkness. At first, it was small and distant, but it grew rapidly, filling the space with an overwhelming radiance. The oppressive shadows receded, and the cries of torment faded into a profound silence. From within, the light emerged a figure unlike any I had ever seen. His presence radiated both authority and compassion, a serenity so powerful it reached into the deepest parts of my soul. I knew instantly who he was, Jesus, the Messiah I had spent my entire life rejecting. He spoke, his voice rich and commanding, yet filled with love. Salvation is through me. I called you, but you did not listen. Today I reveal what you refused to see. You are called to be a light to your people. His words pierced through my heart, forcing me to confront the truth I had long denied. And yet, I couldn't help but wonder, what did this mean for my life, for everything I thought I knew? What choice lay before me now? As the oppressive darkness around me began to peel back, I found myself in a landscape that defied comprehension, a vision of torment so vivid it seemed to sear my very being. Fiery valleys stretched endlessly before me, the flames not merely consuming, but roaring with a sinister, almost living force. The heat was suffocating, enveloping me in waves that burned not just my body, but my soul. In these valleys, shadowy figures writhed in agony, their distorted forms crying out in unending despair. The ground beneath me felt alive, shifting and groaning, as if it too bore the weight of this unrelenting torment. Every sound, the crackling of fire, the wails of the lost, seemed to reverberate with a sorrow that had no end. This place, I realized, was not just a physical hell. but the very embodiment of spiritual suffering, where hope was utterly extinguished. And yet, in this abyss of despair, a sudden shift occurred. From the depths of this torment came a light so pure, so radiant, that it pierced through the darkness with an undeniable force. At first, it was a distant glimmer, but it grew rapidly, flooding the fiery landscape with its brilliance. The flames recoiled and the cries of agony were silenced as the light swept over everything, bringing with it a profound sense of peace. The contrast was staggering. Where the darkness had suffocated, the light seemed to breathe life. Its presence was transcendent, overwhelming, yet deeply personal, as though it had been meant for me alone. I felt it touch the very core of my soul, unraveling the despair that had clung to me moments before. It was more than light. It was purpose, hope, and love manifest. In the center of this radiance stood a figure, unlike anything I had ever seen. His presence was commanding, yet tender, his gaze piercing, yet filled with compassion. This light wasn't just an escape from the darkness, it was a call, an invitation to something far greater. As I stood in awe, feeling both exposed and comforted, I couldn't help but wonder, what was this light asking of me? And what did it mean for my life, my faith, and the truths I had always held dear? The answer, I knew, lay ahead, waiting to be revealed. As I stood there, bathed in the radiant light of his presence, Jesus extended his hand toward me. His gaze was unwavering, filled with both authority and compassion, and his voice carried a weight that left no room for doubt. "Salvation is through me," he said, "and I am here to save you. Take my hand, and you will find freedom." My heart pounded in my chest, a tempest of fear and doubt. Could I let go of everything I had ever believed, everything I had built my life upon? The weight of my past, my pride, and my resistance to this truth bore down on me. Yet in his presence, I felt something I had never experienced before, an unshakable peace, a love that reached into the deepest recesses of my soul. With trembling hands and tears streaming down my face, I reached out and placed my hand in his. In that instant, the darkness around me dissolved. The suffocating despair, the cries of torment, all of it faded away, leaving only light and freedom. When I opened my eyes, I found myself lying in a hospital bed, the sterile glow of fluorescent lights replacing the divine radiance I had just experienced. The beeping of monitors and the distant hum of voices brought me back to the world of the living. Physically, I was intact, but my soul bore the weight of something far greater than the crash. The memory of hell's torment, the faces of the anguished, and the words of Jesus reverberated in my mind, refusing to let go. Every detail of what I had witnessed was seared into my memory, as real as the walls of the hospital room around me. I grappled with the enormity of it all, what I had seen, what I had felt, and the undeniable truth I had encountered. It wasn't just a dream or a hallucination. It was a reality that had forever altered the foundation of my existence. Yet, as I lay there, one question loomed larger than any other. What now? The vision I had experienced, the words Jesus had spoken, they weren't just revelations. They were a call to action, a demand for transformation. But how could I reconcile this newfound truth with everything I had ever known? How could I face the life I had built, the people I had taught, and the beliefs I had defended so fiercely? The answers weren't clear, but one thing was certain. My journey was far from over. The decision to accept his hand had changed everything, but the path ahead would require more courage and faith than I had ever known. What would this new purpose look like, and how would I walk this unfamiliar road? The questions swirled in my mind, setting the stage for the next chapter of my life, a chapter that would demand nothing less than everything I had to give. As I lay in the quiet stillness of recovery, the weight of what I had seen and heard pressed heavily on my heart. My mind returned to the faces of the rabbis I had once revered, their anguished confessions echoing in my soul. We were blind. We rejected the Messiah. How had I missed the truth for so long? The teachings I had devoted my life to suddenly seemed incomplete, as though they were pointing to something greater, something I had refused to see. Driven by a relentless need for answers, I turned back to the sacred texts I had studied my entire life, this time with an open heart. For the first time, I dared to open the New Testament, a book I had once dismissed as irrelevant. As I read, I was struck by the undeniable evidence woven into its pages. Prophecy after prophecy, from the lineage of David to the suffering servant of Isaiah, was fulfilled in the life and words of Jesus. It wasn't just compelling, it was irrefutable. Each word I read deepened my understanding and tore away the veils of doubt and pride that had clouded my vision for decades. Jesus wasn't an outsider to my faith, he was its fulfillment. The Messiah I had long awaited was not a distant figure to come, but the very one I had encountered in that radiant light. His message of love, grace, and salvation resonated deeply, shattering the rigid walls of law and tradition I had built around my heart. The realization was overwhelming. God's love had been there all along, not earned through my efforts, but given freely through Jesus. This truth didn't just change my beliefs, it changed the very core of who I was. I was no longer just a teacher or a rabbi. I had become a witness to something greater than myself, God's grace and truth revealed through His Son. This new understanding ignited a fire within me, one that I could not contain. I knew my life could never return to what it had been before. The purpose Jesus had spoken of in the light became clear. I was called to be a vessel of His love and salvation, not just to the Jewish people, but to all who would listen. This was not a rejection of my heritage, but its fulfillment, a reclaiming of my identity, not only as a Levite, but as a child of God and a witness to His redemptive power. With this new purpose, I committed myself to a path that would require courage, sacrifice, and faith. The question now was how to begin this mission, how to share the truth that had transformed my life with a world that might not be ready to hear it. The answers awaited me, and I was ready to follow where God would lead. I invite you to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share your thoughts and experiences in the comments section below. Your insights are invaluable, and together we can delve deeper into these profound truths. Thank you for being a part of this journey.